Hello and welcome to this episode of Dig Deeper. My name is Shackelford and today we are going to be talking about our well that we have uncovered. So if you remember from our last video on the well, we only had half of it uncovered and we weren't expecting to run into it. So we have been very busy this winter. Before you go and dig into a feature, you really want to uncover the entire thing to get the best look at it, to fully understand that feature before digging into it. So since January, we have dug a further 14 by 20 foot area to expose the remainder of both the brick-lined well and the builder's trench of the well so that we can start preparing to actually excavate into it this summer. So through these excavations and exposing the second half of the well, we have also updated our understanding into the layers in this Confederate dry moat and how it filled up over time. So where we are here, this is the top of the well for us. However, it was cut through by a Confederate dry moat in 1861. So all of this material behind me here are fill layers in that dry moat post-dating 1861 when it was dug. Some of these initial layers down in here are going to be wash events. So as you have rain events, the sides of the ditch are going to slowly wash down into the bottom, slowly filling it up over time. Those layers are from the bottom all the way up to where you start seeing some of the brick in the walls. Once we hit this brick and some of this darker soil up here, these are intentional fill events. And we can actually date them to the early 1900s based on this brick right here. We know that William Leal's house in this area was deconstructed in the early 1900s, and it looks like they took this deconstruction debris and tossed it into the Confederate dry moat to start filling it up. So all of these layers up above it have to post-date the deconstruction of that house. And then some of this stuff much further up here, this first layer up top is very recent material. Some of the staff members here probably remember it being laid down here in the past 20 or so years. What we looked at before was our western profile for the Confederate dry moat. What I'm next to now is our eastern profile. And so you can see it is mostly the same material with just a couple differences here and there. We still start off with that initial wash layer, just rain events eroding in the sides of the ditch. Whereas up top we have our intentional fill layers from Preservation, Virginia. Over here you can see we are missing that deconstruction debris from William Leal's house. So that just goes to show that as you're digging into a feature, it's not always going to be consistent layers all the way across. There can be some variation within. Now, we have exposed the entire well ring, but as I'm sure you can see, all of the bricks, they don't go all the way around it. We have some missing areas where instead you have brick rubble. And right now that's just indicating essentially where the Confederates were digging their dry moat, knocking through the well right here. We think that as they were digging the moat, they probably knocked to a further 6 to 8 feet of this well. And so we're actually still seeing scatter from that original digging event of the Confederate moat. Once we dig down a little bit further, we should get underneath of that Confederate disturbance and see an actual intact well ring all the way around. I mentioned earlier that we had uncovered the entirety of our well ring and our builder's trench. So the builder's trench is what I'm standing on right here. It is this 11-foot diameter circle that surrounds the actual well ring. You can think of it as a little bit of a colonial OSHA. So as they are digging the well down, it both gives them room to work, but it also prevents this really sandy subsoil from collapsing in on them. We're actually essentially going to use this builder's trench, the same size area, as we are digging the well. We ended up constructing a wooden well ring, 11 feet in diameter, 4 feet tall, and we are actually going to place it right on top of this builder's trench so that as we dig down through this material, the the well ring will actually sink down into the ground with us to help support our sidewalls and make it much, much safer to dig. A lot of times in archaeology, unless you are actively digging through a feature and finding artifacts, or unless you can match up a feature to a specific historic document, you're not going to have very specific dating. A lot of what you're going to rely on is relative dating. We can see a good example of that right here. Right now we are theorizing that the well dates to 1617 based on circumstantial evidence, but until we dig through it and see what kind of artifacts we're getting from the well, we're not really going to be able to staple that down. Right here we can see the relationship between our well, or rather our well's builder's trench, and our 1608 to 1610 fort extension ditch. Now we'll talk a little bit more about that in a different video, but we can see that this ditch had to be filled in before the well was dug. So we know that relatively the sequence of events is the expansion ditch is dug and then filled in, and then we have our well that was built and filled in, and then the Confederate moat comes through. We are going to be digging into this well later this summer, and we are very excited. Generally speaking, unless something horrible has happened, wells become a great source of artifacts. They're very artifact dense. That's because once the water goes bad, or it runs dry, more like on Jamestown Island that is going to run brackish, they become these huge trash pits and becomes the town dump up until it gets filled right back up to the top. What makes wells especially exciting, as opposed to cellars or other trash pits, once you get down below the water table, that is waterlogged and anaerobic, which means you get incredible artifact preservation. So we'll be finding all sorts of things we don't normally see, all types of organics. In previous wells, we have found all sorts of leather shoes. We have found pistols, halberds that still have the wooden handles, and you even find a bunch of organics like seeds. And so with this one in particular, since we think the date of this well is right about 1617, based on both our half bricks and wedge bricks down in here that are very similar to the Smithfield well that dates to 1617, and also Argyll's addition in 1617, we think this may be the governor's personal well. There's a possibility that we could find tobacco seeds in here. So to learn a little bit more about the organic artifacts we find in the well and how we find them through flotation, stay tuned for an upcoming Dig Deeper video with Jamestown Rediscovery curator Leah Stricker.